Three, two, one. Welcome to the 12th episode of Sound On. After last week's conversation about social media, which was more of a chill topic, we are back to the more pressing topic about tuition fees. The topic on tuition fees has always been present. However, the usual conversation is about whether tuition fees should even exist in itself and should international students be paying more. Nevertheless, this issue has intensified in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, as there is now a further question about value for money. Hence, this week, we are pleased to have Serena to join us to discuss whether are international students entitled to tuition fee refunds in light of present circumstances. So, Serena, how are you doing, and could you introduce yourself to the audience briefly?
Hi guys, my name is Serena and I'm a first year international business student at the University of Sheffield in the UK. I'm currently back in Malaysia doing my internship, so I'm very, very ecstatic to be here talking about something that I believe is a very personal issue for a lot of us. Back to you.
Yeah, this is indeed a very personal topic to all of us because all three of us are international students and our circumstances has changed significantly over COVID-19. I think most of us came back rather earlier than we expected. So let's talk a bit about our personal experience. So how has COVID-19 affected your university experience, Serena? What is your take on virtual classes and all that changes that has happened?
So I'm in my first year, so I was really excited. Back in September, I was really excited to be here, to be in the UK for the first time, to experience what it's really like to be in university. But sadly to say that my first year was cut short by the pandemic as well as the strikes, the teaching strike, which was something really unexpected for me because I never thought it would happen. I never thought that we would experience two series of strikes from our university as well as the pandemic, obviously. But the virtual learning itself has been quite an interesting experience. I enjoy the flexibility of it, but I do believe that other people hold different opinions. I think that the virtual learning itself is not challenging, but I noticed that attention-wise, whether I'm easily distracted at times, and there are times where I feel like my morale is very low, and I don't feel like getting up and doing work, and no one's really keeping me in check. So I think that's the issue with virtual learning, is the fact that it's too self-paced, and there's just so much gap that we can do with our time that learning is not really on our priority. And I think it's quite obvious to say that we're in a very privileged position to be back in Malaysia, to have afforded the very exorbitant flight tickets back home. And I know that many of my friends were actually left stranded in the UK because, eventually they will have to fly back to UK. So this additional add-on cost is just putting a financial strain on their family. And yeah, that's a sad reality of it.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting what you've actually said. So you brought up a point about how you are a first year student. So Mel and I, we're both second year students. So I think that we sort of had a certain degree of expectation from the University of Sheffield in how they were supposed to handle the situation. So I personally think that they have handled it quite well. I mean, they were very prompt in their response, though it took a while before. There were a lot of uncertainties basically before they finally took decisive action to say that, to tell us in a very straightforward way that classes will be suspended in person. So I'd just like to ask you, very briefly, how did you think our university handled this? Were they agile enough? Were they quick in their response?
I think for my situation, I was set to do my study abroad in my second year. So I think that itself is another dimension to this question, because while many national students or UK EU students were aware that they had to return home, they had their parents to drive up to pick them up. Yep. University students were just sort of left with this big question mark: what's our next step? Do we fly home? What happens to our stuff? And I wish that the university had addressed this, because I personally reached out to my program coordinator and I told him, I'm thinking of returning home. What do you advise? And he says that I think that's a very good, I think that's something you should do. But he had not told anyone about it. Like there was no news from our dean regarding whether international students should return home if they could. And there was just so much uncertainty about my entire program post lockdown. And so I just wish that, they could have taken the international students into consideration and handled the situation a little better. I'm
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that they didn't handle it well. I'm just
Yeah,
saying that,
definitely.
they did what they could. But I'm saying that, they could have been more empathetic to our situation, because for Malaysians, we are flying literally it's like 16 hours on the
Yeah,
plane, right? So it's a long journey. It's a very expensive journey.
it is
And
indeed.
if I had returned home a day later post lockdown, I wouldn't know when I would be coming back. So, and now that I'm back, I left most of my things back in the
Yeah.
UK. So I wish that the UK, like, if I was staying in the uni accommodation, I wish that the uni would have provided some sort of
Mm-hmm.
assistance, whether like, be it indoor like a com or something, or like if they could outsource some sort of storage for us. But it took a while for them to get to that point, which I can understand is very stressful for a lot of students in my position.
Mm-hmm.
And if not for having my like local friends in the UK, I think I would have lost all my things back in the UK. Like I would have no choice but to like leave them back there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the point that you raised about your study abroad is actually a very good point, because it basically highlights the fact, it illustrates the fact that, all of us, our circumstances are very different. So we might,
Yes.
all three of us, we could be international students. But for example, your point in study abroad, it's not something that I've ever considered. I didn't think that would be a problem or an issue in the first place, because like I expected the 3 years of my university life to be very constant, basically. Like I'll just be in Sheffield, I'll just be studying. So that is a different dimension as to how your university life would be adversely affected by this in terms of, say, study abroad. So for me, like the biggest problem with this was that so the course that I studied is often a lot of like assignments and essays. So I think the biggest roadblock I faced in like of virtual learning, which was necessary though not ideal, is that it is the inability to meet lecturers or my tutors very frequently. So I think that this is especially the case for arts or social science students, because your projects and essays, like you need to, there's this need for us very often to actually understand what is expected of us in that assignment. So we get to do better after we meet our tutors, because we know what they want from us. So that was my biggest problem in terms of virtual learning. So I want to hit towards Mel. So she studies a science-based subject. So how has the issue of like labs affected your studies right now, before we move on to the next dimension of this conversation?
Yeah, I think because I'm doing biomedical science, right? So we definitely have like lab sessions, which is a very
Mm-hmm.
important part of our course. So I think we were quite lucky, or at least my batch was quite lucky, because when the lockdown, or when this whole COVID-19 thing happened, we actually already completed most of our labs. I think we were only left with one lab, and then they converted that one into like a virtual lab. So yeah, and then so that's for labs, and then for lectures, I think basic, like everything is online, just like everyone else. And then because I'm going to my third year the next academic year, so they actually, I think third year is the most important one, because we're supposed to have like a proper lab based project where we actually work on our own experiments and all that. And then yeah, they sadly they told us that we won't be able to work in labs, because there's not enough lab space for everyone for social distancing. So what they decided to do is that they are giving us readily available results to look at, which I think is not very ideal, because as a biomed
Mm-hmm.
student, like you definitely want your lab skills, right? Yeah, so that's for next year. And then touching a bit on exams as well. So all of us had um, online exams, which were open book. And I don't know about you guys, but like what I experienced in my department was that they were actually very, very lenient to us, because they significantly cut down the amount of the amount of modules that we had to study, because I think they were very aware that students could be disadvantaged because of all of this, like all the flights and all that. So they actually really cut down the amount that we did study, and also they gave us like 24 hours open book exams. And then what they realized after that was that when we sat for exams and then the results came out, the department realized that the exams were too easy. So the marks that they received, it didn't reflect the results that they would usually receive in the normal exam setting. So they decided to do this thing called scaling. So they actually pushed everyone's results down. And then like obviously a lot of students like started complaining and all that, but then I guess they couldn't do anything. I mean, it's a tough position for them also, because they have standards to uphold, right, for their degree. And I think they have like a lot of external parties auditing their exams and all that, so they had no choice but to push all of our results down. Yeah, so talking about I think just one last part about virtual learning again, like talking about the pros and cons of virtual learning, right? I think the pros are like, I guess, like less resources needed. It's similar to how companies these days, they're incorporating working from home. I think it's the same for universities as well, where maybe universities in the future, they don't even need like a land, they don't even need a building. It's just like everything is online, right? But I think there's also very significant negatives to virtual learning, because
Definitely.
like what Serena said just now, like there's a lack of like a schedule or timetable to follow. Maybe for some people, like on the bright side, it encourages like maybe self-discipline and all that, but not everyone has that, right? And also there's also, like Chris said, there's no human connection, and I think university is all about building bonds. And I think the more pressing issue about virtual learning is that how there's like a variety of access for different people. So for example, the underprivileged, right, for example, maybe they don't have a stable internet connection and they can't access virtual learning. I think there's this student from Sabah who got viral because she was on a tree for 24 hours, like looking for internet connection to sit for exams, right? So I think that's like one of the examples, and I think it relates back to like one of the previous episodes that we filmed previously about like how it increases the gap between the privileged and the underprivileged in terms of education. Yeah, and also I think one thing that my department realized was a problem is that a lot of students from China, they couldn't access a lot of portals. So for example, they can't access Google, they can't access Google Forms. I don't know, I don't think they can access Gmail as well, which I think is a big problem, because like all of our emails are in Gmail, right? Yeah. So like what do you guys think? Like, do you guys think that virtual learning can be something that can be permanently incorporated into the future?
I feel like virtual learning has been around since before COVID, and it's on this trajectory that it will become bigger and bigger and bigger. There are a lot of investments into it, into education, technology. But it comes with a setback, and that is, it doesn't tailor to individual needs. For example, like you mentioned, the Sabahan Malaysian who went viral because she spent 24 hours in a tree doing her exam. I feel like, yes, I want to commend her on her determination, because that was honestly awe-inspiring. But at the same time, it was really heartbreaking to see that it reflects poorly on us as a nation, as a Malaysian, because it shows that we're not doing enough for our people, that students have no access to internet in this day and age, where we're moving towards, or we're supposed to be approaching towards Industry 4.0, and everyone's supposed to be connected via internet stuff. So I do think that this highlights the disparity in internet access within our country, and I believe it's also the same, or it mirrors other countries as well. And I do think that universities need to factor this into consideration and be very understanding and empathetic towards the students who are struggling with the right technology, because at the end of the day, if you don't have the right technology, the virtual learning is ineffective. So yeah.
I agree with that point, actually. I mean, the thing about virtual learning is that, yes, it has been growing for years now. I think that even before this pandemic, a lot of us don't attend lectures in university, but we replay the recordings of the lectures online. So that is an example of virtual learning in itself already existing
Yeah.
long before the circumstances that we are in right now. But to the core of Melissa's question, like, do we think that it's something that can be permanent? I think that it is possible that it can be like a new normal in the future, but I don't think that it should be permanent. I think that it cannot because of the problems that we've already raised, like the issues of like accessibility, human contact, and all that. These are essential. And let's put ourselves in this position whereby, like, we study the UK, right? Imagine if they completely moved it to virtual learning. So international students would also be very adversely affected by this, even if they can afford internet access and all that. Because I think that, like for instance, I think Sheffield was very cognizant of the fact that Mole wasn't working as quickly as it should be for international students who were back home in their own country because of issues such as like server connectivity and all that. So these are things in which, yes, virtual learning can happen, but it certainly won't be efficient for international students doing distance learning, and also for people in Malaysia, such as the case that you raised in Sabah. Like, this leads to the key question, the key point, which is that, like, we can talk about development, moving towards IR 4.0 and all that, but what is the utility of all that if ordinary people cannot even have access to such developments? So this leads us to the point that the key topic about in this week's session, which is about are we entitled to refunds? So I'd just like to talk then about in order for us to have that argument, in order to build up the argument. So has our university experience fallen short of our expectations? Either one of you.
Yeah, I think so. The thought that I had in mind when I knew that I had to pay the same amount of fees next year when semester 1 is almost confirmed to be, it is confirmed to be almost like everything online, right? So I guess in my mind was that for me personally, as like a science student, I feel like I'm paying a higher amount of fees compared to like arts and social science students because of the lab resources. And I know that with virtual learning, I won't get access to these lab resources. So what's the point of me paying extra? So I think we will go further into this topic later, whether we actually deserve a refund and whether it's actually feasible for the UK to give international students a refund. But I think for me, like, what I had in mind was that maybe the least that they can do is to cut down, like to make like a standard fees for all students in the university, since everything will be virtual anyway. Because I think a lot of the higher education people in the UK, they say that, we are not giving any refunds because we are ensuring that the standards of education is still there and all that. But it's obvious that our tuition fees, we are not just paying for our education, but we are obviously paying for a lot of facilities that we will not be able to use because of this COVID thing as well. Yeah, so I think a bit about tuition fee refund, like a bit of background on that. At least from the point of view of University of Sheffield, I'm not sure about other unis, but I think the home students had this campaign called Cancel Debt Not Futures, where they were actually trying to get the government to get their loans to be cancelled. So basically, they don't have to pay for their fees, right? And then the international students started to realize that, how come there isn't an equivalent campaign for international students when we pay so much more extra? So I think that was like from our students union, they were trying to get the government to do something, but in the end nothing was done. So I guess that is why we thought of having this podcast today, because it is like quite an important topic that we are definitely, and I think at this point we are definitely not getting a refund, at least for now. So so Serena, what do you think?
I think you said everything that I would say, but I just want to add on. I think the severity of this issue with the pandemic is that you're adding the strikes, the industrial teaching strikes to this equation, which honestly just exacerbates the entire situation, because we can't blame the universities for COVID-19. So I can understand where the university is coming from for not reimbursing students, but strikes is something that is the responsibility of the university, because like if they had provided better working conditions, better remuneration, better pay, to our lecturers and our professors, then the humanities and art teaching faculty wouldn't have participated in the teaching strike. And rightly so, I do support them in doing so. But to that end, I missed out about 5 weeks of contact hours. That's almost like a fraction of our entire semester fees. And I do think that, what the university can do and should do is probably compensate for the period where the strikes took place, especially for the arts and humanities student. Because, for example, if you were a master's student or PhD, that few weeks would severely affect a lot of your work and your grades, and it affects our experience as students as well. Because as Chris said earlier, like university isn't just really a place to study, it's also an outlet for socializing with people. You meet people, you interact, and that's honestly the best way to learn. And I feel like now that the university is not doing that, the most important thing they can do is just moving forward, helping us to reduce international student fees.
Yeah, so I think that based on what both of you have said, it's basically clear that on the point of whether or not is university now good value for money in present circumstances, I think that the plausible argument would be that it's not. It's not good value for money. So I think that for me, I do think that it's not good value of money because of the shortcomings of online classes. So I think that whilst the university has been very, very agile in adapting to these challenging circumstances, I do think that online classes, virtual learning, has a lot of shortcomings. So, for example, you have student attendance and participation. So, participation is actually very important in a course like mine in order for a 2-hour seminar or tutorial to go on. And it was just really bad. I don't blame my friends, my other classmates, for example, for not wanting to participate too much, or maybe they have their own issues of attendance. But this is clearly the shortcomings of virtual learning, and a lot cannot be done for it. So I think that this is one of the biggest shortcomings. So I think that what we basically said, that it's not good value for money. And just a very, very quick quote. I think that this is an argument that I got from The Guardian, and it says that it quotes a student saying that we lost all of our international courses, events, networking opportunities, and even access to university facilities like the library and data terminals. So I think that that's a very key point about how I think that we feel that it's no longer good value for money, and we do deserve a compensation of to a certain degree. So, and also to add on what Serena has mentioned about strikes, we are both on the same boat. I don't know I think that Mel didn't experience the strikes.
Yeah, not really.
Firstly, yeah, but I lost across 2 semesters of strikes, about a week before university decided to end its face-to-face teaching. We were still on strike. I spent about 5 weeks at home, not just doing my own thing because our lecturers were on strike. And these actually shows us the issues that the wider problem of universities, which is that they do have a problem with regard to funding. And so the problems that they raised because of COVID-19 about the shortcomings of virtual learning, these issues have been exacerbated by the strike action across 2 semesters. So I also agree with why the lecturers are having a strike, but it also does not negate the point that we're making, which is that we are not getting what we paid for. So, and also to add on about this point about the strikes, which is that, from my department, I think about only 1 or 2 lecturers didn't strike. So I've had conversations with them about why they had to go for the strikes. And you completely sympathize. I mean, most people would sympathize with the problems that they're facing. The reasons as to why they're striking are very, very significant, such as issues such as unequal pay between men and women, the lack of promotions for minorities and all that. These are issues that have to be addressed. And I think that the pandemic has added on to the pressures of these issues. So what I think is that what we're saying is that regardless of whether a refund is possible, we think that we deserve a refund because of that. So I think that one of the options that are available, so other than refunds, right, there are other means of compensation that can be given towards students, to students, which is such as, for example, there has been a committee of members of parliaments in the UK have suggested that whilst they cannot give a blanket refund to every student, they have suggested that students should be able to seek compensation or the opportunity to repeat part of their course. So what do you think about compensation or even the opportunity to repeat part of our courses without having to pay?
Yeah, I think the problem, again, I think there is no one size fits all solution, right? Where I don't think there is a single solution that can benefit everyone equally. So in terms of what Chris said about the repeat, right? I think people will also be hesitant to repeat because it's like, some people, like, they don't really want to waste time. They want to enter the working field like as young as possible so that they can gain as much knowledge or whatever. So I don't think that there are a lot of students who would want to repeat, because at the end of the day, I think it's also a bit time wasting. Yeah, what do you think, Serena?
I think you're right. I think other than that, they would have to opt for obviously a more financial aided option, which would be a compensation, maybe a partial refund, and not a full refund, because like we are aware that universities are hit really badly by the lockdown financially, and that at least 13 universities across the UK have declared bankruptcy or are moving towards insolvency. And so I don't think refund is necessary or required by the university, but I do think a partial compensation for the lack of contact time, or like if they were to do another, let's say like Melissa was saying, how like they might consider doing part of their courses again if they were to do a little minor repeat. Those might most likely be online anyway, so they should do a partial refund. I think that's the point I'm trying to raise. Not to like give a full refund, but to a partial refund, because I personally sympathize with what the universities are going through as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because like you mentioned how like the universities are also facing financial difficulties, right? So I think it's also important to, like, as students, it's important not to feel too entitled, like demanding that you need refunds or whatever, because we have to understand that because of this pandemic, everyone is in a tough situation, right? And I think from the universities, I tried to like search out a bit just now, and like I think the universities are also facing like billions of loss, and I think the unis won't be able to give much help and won't be able to do much without the help from the government. And I think they have requested for like a £2 billion bailout from the government, but it was unfortunately rejected. But instead, the UK government gave them like a few billions of tuition fees in advance. So it's like, it's not giving them extra money, it's just giving the money that they're supposed to give, but they're just giving it earlier. So I think that is also not very helpful. And I think what the ministry is also doing is that they're imposing a number of controls for universities. So basically, it's just to make sure that that the universities are supporting each other. So there are no universities that like have a high number of students, and then there's another university with 0 students. So they're trying to impose like a maximum number of students that each university can admit, which I guess it is a reasonable solution, but I think it's also very hard for the universities, especially those who are used to being more financially stable. I think a lot of the universities are really in a tough situation now. So yeah, I think it is important to know that it's not easy for the universities to refund us, and it's not easy for the government to refund us as well.
So yeah, definitely. I think I agree with all the points that both of you have actually raised, because that's clearly not a one-size-fits-all solution, because I think that a lot of like public officials in the UK also recognize that students are very unhappy about this and they deserve some form of compensation and refund. But they've also been very aware of the fact that a blanket refund is not possible, which is why one of the reasons as to why they're trying to basically cater to our needs is that a compensation can come in the form of like reduced tuition fees, which is what Serena has raised, or even as far as say accommodation costs if it is university accommodation. And I think the opportunity to repeat part of students' courses is actually like, whilst you have raised the point about how perhaps that's in itself not really a good value for money thing because or it's just not very ideal because it is a waste of their time basically. I think that they've actually suggested the opportunity to repeat part of your course for free because many students would feel that, for example, they have not been able to perform as well as they could have in normal circumstances if this pandemic did not strike. But I do think that perhaps this point is, to a certain extent, not very, I should say, applicable in the sense that most universities in the UK, as far as I'm aware of, have already set a safety net policy in which, our results in the second semester will not affect the marks that we've already attained in Sem 1. So basically, I think, if I'm not mistaken, if our Sem 1 is higher than Sem 2, they'll take the Sem 1 and something like that. So this is already a representation of the agility of like UK universities in adapting to these difficult circumstances. But I think that they can also talk about issues such as like reimbursing student debts and all that. But I think that for us international students, I think that perhaps in a certain way, like if we feel like it's not good value for money, I think that universities should be open to the idea of having, some sort of like more targeted policies for international students. For example, when it comes to say refunds or reduction of costs, of tuition fees, it could be targeted for international students according to those who need it, and also for domestic students, for example. I mean, because a lot of international students already have to submit their financial statement, for instance, to the immigration officials or even the university before they arrive in university. So, if they are able to like basically track students who would be more adversely affected by these changes, they could perhaps look towards that in order to offer things in a more targeted manner rather than a blanket way. So yeah. So I've moved my background because of noise, but anyway, let's get back to the second part of our discussion in this week's session. So the key point, which is that we're trying to address right now, is: are university students entitled to a tuition fee refund? I think that based on the points that has already been raised, such as how universities are in their own ways struggling, as a study has already found that 13 universities or colleges in the UK are at the risk of going bankrupt if coronavirus continues to hit, as coronavirus hits their finances. So I think that because of those various issues as to why a tuition fee refund's feasibility might be problematic, which we will elaborate on later on after this, I think that it is safe to say that I think a tuition fee refund is perhaps, whilst morally speaking, we could argue that we are entitled to a tuition fee refund because of the issues that we've already raised. I think that it is safe to say that it cannot happen for various reasons that we will raise again later on. So what can we push for right now? I think that a more feasible way in which we want to address this issue is that perhaps we could push for a reduction in our tuition fees. So, for example, I think that, science students pay lab fees, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. So perhaps a reduction could come on that front, whereas you could pay for perhaps lesser fees in terms of, say, administrative costs or library facilities and all that. So what do you guys think? Do you think that a reduction of tuition fees in certain areas would be the most feasible way forward in present circumstances?
Yeah, actually, okay, comparing home students, which is like UK locals, British locals, and international students, right? I think for us international students, obviously we will say that it's only fair for us to get a refund as well if home students get a refund. But I think the problem is that it's much easier to refund home students because they don't pay fees directly to the university. They are basically on loans. So if you see it from that point of view, right, they don't actually, like, the money isn't actually there, which is why they were having the cancel debts not futures campaign, because like the money isn't actually there. You just have to cancel the loan, and that is much easier than actually asking for a refund. And yeah, I think for international students, I think it's very tough as well, because I guess you can look at two different points, right? So one point would be maybe giving a partial refund for last academic year, so 1920, or they could reduce the fees for the next academic year, which will also be affected by COVID, which is 2021. And then I guess if you see it in that way, it'll be much easier to reduce the fees for 2021 because we actually haven't paid the fees yet. But then if you do that, then the people who have, or the students who have already graduated in 1920 won't be able to benefit from this. So yeah, again, there is no one solution that fits that fits everyone, that will make everyone happy. So I think like what Chris said just now, I think one thing that can be done is to look at it at a case by case basis, so that everyone to a certain extent can benefit. But I think it's a lot easier for us to say this, and it's really not easy for the university to do something like this, or even the government to do it. So yeah, what do you think, Serena?
I think what you're saying is right. Like, to that end, I think that it's really tricky to really ask for a refund, because we don't really have the numbers, and numbers tell everything, and there's no transparency in terms of numbers, so we don't really know where our fees go into. But just to like put it out there to our listeners, so international students pay more than twice the amount of home students. So if home students pay about 9,250, we pay about like 20,000, for example. And half of that fund actually go into research, and the other half, some say to sustain the subsidized fees of home students, and that's fair. That is fair. But what I think is ridiculous is, in the coming semester, in the next semester, this fall, is that universities expect students, international students, to pay the same amount of fees, but to be in the UK, to pay like overhead such as like cost of living, accommodation, but learning from your computer, like that makes no sense to me. That's very unfair to international students. That should not be the case for universities, but it is happening. But at the same time, it's a double-edged sword. Like, when you make a decision like this, there are consequences. If universities were to give refunds, they have to cut costs elsewhere, and oftentimes it happens with cutting down the wages of their staff, or laying off or retrenching staff. So I think to really balance it out, you would have greater unemployment in the UK, and that's something that the government would not encourage. So it's a very tricky situation. But I do believe that, if we're cutting down on costs in terms of like, we're not using the premise of university, so we can cut costs there. We don't need food, so that it could cut costs in terms of like catering and stuff. Maybe just give us back in terms of like compensation, instead of expecting an international student to pay for an exorbitant visa, which is something that I think is ridiculous, because we're paying visa, like Malaysians, we pay about like 7,000 in terms of visa, as well as the healthcare, which we will not be entitled to when we're there anyways, because they're not going to help us if we contract coronavirus, let's be honest. So we're paying all these fees that make no sense, and then on top of it, we're paying 20,000 a year for nothing, when we could learn it from YouTube for free. Not to say that the quality of our lectures are bad. I'm just saying, like, if we were to compare it, it's ridiculous to expect students to be there and then to learn virtually.
Yeah, I think one thing that our university said, which I really appreciate also, is that they actually told us, if I'm not mistaken, that they understand that if we can't return to Sheffield, they will try to support us in every way, for us to be able to do everything virtually, from our own countries. But I'm aware that other universities, like they didn't say the same thing. In fact, I think I know at least one university in the UK that said that no, you have to come back to the university, which I think is really like ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that actually the points that you raised are actually very strong in the sense that I think that international students pay like exorbitant tuition fees already. We pay double the amount that home students do. Like there is a different argument as to why international students pay more than domestic students. But the key thing is that the key point that we're raising is that it's about the value of money simply, which is that we're paying for facilities that we cannot use because of the present circumstances. And, it is not the fault of the university that we are unable to use those facilities and we're unable to get what we actually paid for. But it is because of this, basically, the circumstances that we're in right now is beyond the control of the universities. But we have to acknowledge the fact that it is unfair to expect international students to continue paying for things that they cannot use, and even for domestic students as well. Which is why, but we also recognize the fact that we need to come up with a nuanced argument. This is very important. Why is it that universities cannot give us the refund? Like based on the dealings that I've had with, say, the University of Sheffield, for example. So, just a very quick point about this, which is that in my first year, I actually paid an extra £2,000 because there was a mistake in the calculation of, say, my scholarship and the tuition fees. I did not realize that until I was going to register for my second year. And the university, when I pointed out about that, when I pointed out to them that I've actually paid £2,000 extra, they were very quick to just immediately give me a refund. I did not have to ask them to refund me, to give me a refund of the £2,000. They immediately gave it. So the point that I'm making is that, like, say, for Sheffield and perhaps many other universities, if they can provide a refund, if it is the right thing to do, they would do it. But the thing is whether or not they're capable of doing so. And I think that right now, it is important to recognize that it is going to be very difficult for them to do so, even if they want to cater to our needs. Like, for example, the point that we've raised about how 13 universities and colleges in the UK are at risk of going bankrupt. And we can see this in a more major point in Sheffield itself, is like in my department of politics and international relations, like numerous members of our teaching staff in that department, university teachers, academic staff, teaching assistants, and all that, they have been relieved of their duties because of COVID-19. Relieving their duties either for, say, like they're basically told that their services are no longer needed because of present circumstances, or I think in most cases, their contracts are not being renewed, despite the fact that they were sort of like, despite the hard work that they've already been doing. So this actually shows us about how difficult the situation is for universities in order to offer us the refund, a full tuition fee refund, which is why I think that what we're suggesting is something of like a more compromised position, if I would say, which is that if you cannot give us a full refund, why not a reduction in our fees? And I think that the point that Mel raised about how, for instance, for the academic year of 2019-2020, we're not telling them to just refund everything for 2019-2020, and say the partial refund is not even just for the whole of 2019-2020, but it's only for, say, the second semester, because that was when we were not able to enjoy the facilities, and they could perhaps entertain such points for the next academic year. So I think that we've actually come up with a very nuanced argument about how there should be a balance. Like, yes, we understand that the universities are in a very difficult position, they're in a precarious position, but I think that we also need to assert the point, which is that not all international students who make it to Britain to further their studies are very, I should say, not everybody is very wealthy. Like we also suffer losses because of this, and our problems should, at least to a certain extent, be entertained by the university.
Yeah, and I think also one thing to add, which is what Serena actually already brought up just now, is that how the universities and the UK government, they keep saying how without international students they won't be able to survive financially. So I think that really, like, it doesn't sound good in a way that I feel that they are looking at international students like they are not looking at us as students, but they are looking at us like money, like we only bring cash to them, like, because like they said that I think if no international students come to the UK, they will be facing a £5 billion hole in the higher education system, which brings us to a point that our tuition fees is not just paying for our own education, but it's also being paid to sustain the whole university as a whole, whether it's research, whether it is actually like it's also benefiting, like our money is also benefiting the home students as well and the university. So yeah, so I think maybe we can, like, just to wrap it up, do you guys have anything else to add before we end the episode?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to add on to basically what you have just said about international students. I think that we play a major role in terms of educational funding in the UK. So I'd just like to bring up another point that I read during my research, which is that according to the newspaper The Guardian in the UK, to basically to highlight the point about how UK universities have been under financial strain long before COVID-19, in the sense that, for example, The Guardian says that research funding has fallen by 12.8% in real terms since 2010, but that gap, that fallen research funding, that gap has been filled by international students, particularly those from China, because I think that between 2011 to, I think, for example, 2014 or 2018, there was, if I'm not mistaken, about a spike of 60% growth in students from China coming to the UK. So they contributed significantly to these gaps in research funding. But the thing is that, and also the importance of international students is clearly highlighted in the case of COVID-19, because adding to the uncertainty that universities are now facing, which is that, the attendance of non-UK students in the next academic year is basically up in the air. They're not very sure about how many of us how many international students would be enrolling themselves next year. And in fact, I think that this is also an issue amongst perhaps our peers, our friends, because I would think that numerous of them would probably be thinking of basically not returning next year, or perhaps deferring their degree by a year. So this will leave a huge black hole in the university's finances, which is that the point that I'm making is that international students contribute a lot through tuition fees. And, because of this pandemic, it is highlighted the fact that university survival depends on the ability of students to actually attend university, but it also depends on international students, because if we all decide not to go back, they would suffer. International students would suffer in terms of, not being able to get that UK education, but universities in the UK will also suffer, which is why I think that it is actually very important for universities, not just in the UK, but universities in Malaysia, or universities across the globe, especially those that rely on international students, to actually at least hear us out, if you get what I mean, listen to as to why we want a refund. It is not just enough for, members of parliament, for example, to say that we hear you, but we cannot do it because of so and so and so, but rather they should actually be more willing to listen to recommendations and even other options for international students in terms of this. Because, for example, the committee of MPs that I was talking about did suggest that the government should cover refunds to a certain extent, because 7% of students were satisfied with quality of education, whereas about 47% of them said that they paid for accommodation that they did not need and all that. So this is actually a very pressing matter that really needs to be discussed urgently. And I think that we can be very pleased by the fact that we've actually come up with more kind of balanced response towards this problem.
Yeah. Serena, anything you want to add?
I think just to sum it all up, really, we're aware that COVID is detrimental to both sides, students and the universities. Things can be better, obviously, but the question really is, can universities afford to do so to make them better, and is it viable? And honestly, I don't think so. But we do know that going forward, digital learning have to be implemented, and it is the responsibility of universities to make a compromise, because like Mel said, international students are very vulnerable. We're left, we're just this bank for them to take money off of us. And so in this vulnerability, I think that universities can do better by being more understanding and more sympathetic to us, and be more mindful that, hey, we're humans too, we're students with parents whose income is also hinged upon the situation of COVID. So that's all I have to say, really.
Yeah, so I think just to sum it all up, right? I think it's important to understand that everyone is in a tough spot because of COVID-19. And although, like all of us as students, we know that, to a certain extent, we do deserve a refund, but I think it's very important not to feel too entitled, because we also have to understand that, the university, the government, we're all in a tough position, and also there is no solution that will satisfy everyone. So yeah, and so I think we just have to take more time to listen to each other, because if everyone is just arguing and saying what they want without listening to what the other side is saying, right, I think we won't be able to reach a conclusion anytime soon. Yeah, so I think that is all for today. Thank you, Serena, for joining us. I think your thoughts really contributed like a lot of dimensions into our topic today. So thank you so much, and
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
yeah, we hope to have you again in our future episodes. And yeah, see you guys next
Right, see you.
Bye.